You know the story they sell you. Priest helps street kids, opens schools, gets canonized. Saint John Bosco in the history books looks clean, but nobody talks about what he saw in the night, the dreams that made him shake, the visions where he walked through hell and watched teenagers burn, specific kids, names he knew, faces from his own schools. And the reason they were there? Not theft, not murder. One sin, repeated, that starts young and follows them down. Turin, 1850s through 1880s, boys flooding into industrial cities from farms. No parents, no structure. And Bosco keeps a journal of dreams that read like horror. Which ones are metaphor? Which ones did he write the morning after and then watch come true? What did he see that made him build an entire education system just to fight one thing? Giovanni Melchiorre Bosco, born August 16, 1815, in Becci, a farm hamlet outside Turin in Piedmont. Mother Margherita Ochiena. Father Francesco, dead when Giovanni is 2, 3 kids. Extreme poverty. He's sleeping in a hayloft, eating polenta that's half sawdust. But he's memorizing sermons after hearing them once. By age 9, he's performing acrobat tricks in the village square, then preaching what he heard at Mass, word for word. Local priests notice. He enters seminary at Chieri in 1835, gets ordained June 5th, 1841 at Turin's chapel of the Archbishop's residence, 26 years old. Steal bread, end up in Carlo Alberto's reformatory prison where the death rate is 8% per year. Bosco starts gathering them on Sundays near Porta Palazzo, teaches catechism. The first gathering, December 8th, 1841, is one kid, Bartolomeo Gorelli, a 16-year-old bricklayer's apprentice. By 1844, Bosco has 300 boys showing up. He moves the group 4 times because landlords evict him. He settles in Valdocco, a shed next to the Pinardi house. That's his base. Salesian Central Archives in Rome, and from the diocesan inquiry documents for his beatification process that include testimonies under oath from 57 witnesses who lived with him. Now back to the information. The ones that shake him early are simpler. A road, 2 paths. Boys he knows walking one way or the other. When they go left, he sees where they end up. He describes fire, darkness, specific faces. He writes names in the margin. Then he watches those boys over the following months. Several die in accidents. One drowns in the Po River. Another gets tuberculosis. Bosco starts pulling boys aside, telling them, "I saw you last night. You're in danger." The boys think he's insane. Some listen, most don't. The angel doesn't name it directly in that dream, but Bosco underlines one phrase in his journal: sins of impurity. That's the term he uses for the rest of his life. It covers everything from masturbation to prostitution to lustful thoughts entertained. In 19th century Catholic moral theology, it's all one category. He describes being led down a corridor into a massive cavern. He sees flames, hears screaming. The guide shows him rows of souls. Bosco recognizes some. He writes 5 names, all boys from his oratory, ages 14 to 18. He asks why they're there. The guide says they died in sin, they were warned, they didn't listen. Bosco wakes up sweating. He writes that his sheets are soaked. He calls the 5 boys into his office one by one over the next week, tells them what he saw. 4 laugh it off. 1, a boy named Carlo, cries and confesses he's been stealing and visiting a brothel on Via Milano. Bosco hears his confession. Carlo stops going. 2 months later, one of the other 4, a boy named Giuseppe, age 16, is kicked by a horse in Valdocco and dies within 3 hours. Bosco writes, "I tried to warn him." The death record from Turin's parish of San Francesco d'Assisi lists the date, September 9th, 1853, cause of death, internal bleeding from blunt trauma. It becomes a chain, and when you die in that state, there's no second chance. His letters from this period, archived in the Salesian Historical Institute in Rome, repeat the same warnings. The devil uses pleasure to trap you young before reason can fight. He's not talking about alcohol or violence. He's talking about sexual sin. Specifically, he's talking about boys discovering their bodies and getting stuck in a cycle. 1855, October. Bosco records another dream. This one he shares publicly with his boys. He describes a giant meadow. At one end, a castle. At the other, a pit. 1,000 boys start walking. They split into 2 groups. One group heads toward the castle, the other toward the pit. As they get close, the pit group starts running. They can't stop. They're laughing at first, then screaming. They fall in. Bosco wakes up. He gathers his boys the next Sunday and recounts the entire thing. He says, the ones running toward the pit were slaves to pleasure. They couldn't stop themselves, even when they saw the edge. He records that 12 boys came to confession that week and admitted struggles with impurity. 4 of them specifically said they felt addicted, that they'd tried to stop and couldn't. The term dopamine won't be coined until 1897. Neurochemistry is decades away. But Bosco is describing what sounds exactly like compulsive behavior. He sees boys repeating something that hurts them. He sees shame, secrecy, escalation. He writes in an 1856 letter to a priest in Genoa, "These boys hide it like a poison. They think they're alone. They think they're the only one. And because they hide it, it grows. By the time they're 18, they can't remember a week without it." He assigns older boys as prefects to watch the younger ones. Why? He writes in his school manual, "Solitude is the enemy. Idleness is the door. Keep them busy. Keep them together. Keep them watched." He's building an environment designed to eliminate privacy. Modern eyes see surveillance. He saw protection. Lists, forbidden items. Novels with romantic plots, illustrations of women, anything that might excite the passions. He searches bags, confiscates materials. Boys caught with hidden images or books are expelled. One boy, a teenager named Federico, is sent home in 1862 after another student reports he had drawings of nude figures. Federico's family appeals. Bosco refuses. He writes to the father, better he lose his education than his soul. The other has a statue of Mary. The Pope steers the ship between the two columns and anchors there. The attacking boats crash. But in the dream, Bosco also sees boys swimming in the water. Some swim toward the ship, others swim toward wreckage. Those swimming away are covered in chains. He asks what the chains are. The voice, which he attributes to Mary, says, "Sins of the flesh." Bosco records this dream as seen by him on the night of May 30th, 1862. He shares it in a sermon on June 1st. The text is printed in the Catholic reading series he publishes monthly. He founds the Salesians, a religious order named after Francis de Sales, in 1859. The order gets papal approval in 1869. His method spreads. Everywhere he goes, he preaches the same message. Guard your senses, custody of the eyes, flee bad company, confess often. He emphasizes confession, weekly, daily if possible. He tells boys, the devil wants you silent, confession breaks his grip. He hears confessions for hours. Boys line up. Some wait 2 hours to confess to him specifically. He writes a letter to his mother in 1872, now archived in the Salesian Postulation Archives, where he says, "Don Bosco saved my life by showing me what I was becoming." Michel describes falling into habitual sin at age 10 and feeling trapped. He credits Bosco's warnings and the structure of the school with breaking the pattern. Michel dies April 22nd, 1873. Bosco writes his biography within a year. It becomes one of his most popular books. He uses Michel's story as proof that early intervention works. He tells boys to avoid idleness, avoid staying in bed too long in the morning, avoid undressing completely even when alone, sleep with hands outside the covers, wake immediately if they sense temptation, and pray to Mary. The book sells 20,000 copies in the first year. It's reprinted 40 times by his death. He meets with bishops, aristocrats, politicians. He gives speeches. In Paris, he's invited to speak at a boys' school run by the Brothers of the Christian Schools. He gives a talk to 300 boys, ages 12 to 17. The topic is vocations. But halfway through, he pivots. He describes a vision he had the previous night. He says he saw many of the boys in the room standing at a crossroads. One path led to priesthood, marriage, or good work. The other led to despair. He says, the difference is one choice you make in private. He doesn't elaborate it further in the public talk, but he meets privately with the school's director afterward and warns him that several boys are at risk. The director, a brother named Francois, writes a letter to his superior describing the meeting, dated August 11th, 1876. Francois writes, Don Bosco sees things we cannot. He describes struggles I know are present but did not mention to him. Healthy trees are boys in a state of grace. Diseased trees covered in fungus and rot are boys in mortal sin. He describes seeing hundreds of diseased trees. He tries to cut them down to stop the spread, but they regrow. The only solution, the angel guide tells him, is to plant new trees nearby that will crowd out the diseased ones. Bosco interprets this as the need for good example and strong community. He writes, one good friend can save a boy, one bad friend can destroy him. 1890 and 1894, which include sworn statements from 84 of his former students, now housed in the Vatican Secret Archives, under the reference ASV, Congregazione delle Cause dei Santi, Processus, volume 1243. Now back to the story. Arsh. He's received by Pope Pius IX 3 times and Pope Leo XIII twice. He's built 36 schools. He has 768 Salesians working under him. But privately, his journals grow darker. In 1882, he records what he calls the vision of the eternal loss. He describes standing in hell. He sees not flames but coldness, darkness, souls isolated, unable to see or touch each other. He hears wailing. He asks how many souls are there for sins of impurity specifically. The guide tells him more than half. Bosco wakes up. He writes, I cannot shake this. He redoubles his preaching on the topic. Morning and evening prayers must include a section dedicated to the virtue of purity. Boys must have zero access to secular newspapers or novels. Recreation time must be supervised at all times. Benetti is instructed to watch for particular friendships, a coded term in 19th century Catholic institutions for homosocial bonds that might become sexual. Boys found in pairs alone are to be separated immediately. Benetti writes back, questioning the strictness. Bosco responds, "Better harsh than sorry. One boy lost is one too many." He confesses he's been struggling with the sin for 3 years. He says he's tried to stop dozens of times and keeps failing. He says he feels hopeless. Bosco, bedridden, sits up. He takes Angelo's hand. He tells him, "You've confessed. You're sorry. That's what matters. The sin is not the falling. The sin is the staying down." Angelo later writes a letter to his brother, now preserved in the Salesian archives, dated September 23rd, 1884, describing the conversation. Angelo writes, "Don Bosco looked at me like he could see my soul. He said, 'The devil wants me to give up, but God's mercy is infinite.' Avoid physical contact, even with friends. Avoid warm baths. Avoid sleeping on your stomach. Avoid rich foods that heat the blood. Avoid late nights. Avoid theaters. Avoid dancing. Pray a rosary daily, specifically for purity. Go to confession weekly. Receive communion as often as allowed. Read lives of saints who were chaste. Invoke Mary under the title Help of Christians." The book sells 60,000 copies in 2 years. 1887, spring. Bosco is dying. He's 71. He's confined to bed in his room at the Valdaco Oratory. He stops eating solid food. He receives last rites in April, but he keeps working. He dictates letters. He hears confessions from boys who come to his bedside. One boy, a 15-year-old named Luigi, visits him on April 10th. Luigi confesses he's been accessing pornographic lithographs sold under the counter at a print shop on Via Garibaldi. Bosco, barely able to speak, tells him, "Those images will kill you. They lodge in your mind. You'll be 50 and still see them. Burn them. Confess. Run." Luigi later writes that he burned the images that night. He becomes a Salesian priest in 1902. He dictates what he calls his final testament to the Salesians. It's a short document, 8 paragraphs. The 4th paragraph reads, "Watch over the purity of your boys as you would watch over a flame in the wind. One gust, and it's gone. And once gone, it's nearly impossible to relight." The document is signed by Bosco with a shaking hand on January 25th, 1888. It's preserved in the Salesian Mother House in Turin. Bosco dies January 31st, 1888, at 4:45 in the morning. His room is packed with Salesians and former students. The cause for his canonization opens in 1890. The process takes 36 years. He's beatified in 1929 by Pope Pius XI. He's canonized on Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1934. The canonization document issued by Pope Pius XI lists his heroic virtues. One section specifically praises his defense of youth purity. The focus shifts to his kindness, his schools, his playful methods. The dreams are still in the archives, but they're not featured. When the 1934 canonization homily is given in St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope mentions Bosco's visions once, in passing, and emphasizes his educational reforms. The visceral warnings about teenage sexuality are left out. Vatican II opens in 1962. The language of sin is softened. Confession rates drop. Bosco's strict methods look outdated. Some Salesians start questioning whether his fears were overblown. A 1968 article in the Salesian Bulletin, the Order's internal magazine, asks, "Was Don Bosco too harsh?" The article is never republished, but the question lingers. In 2008, the Salesian Historical Institute in Rome digitizes Bosco's handwritten journals. Scholars can now access them freely. The dreams are all there. The names, the dates, the descriptions. In 2011, a Salesian priest named Father Pietro Stella publishes a 600-page analysis called Don Bosco's Visions, a critical study. Stella cross-references the dreams with death records, student registries, and letters. He finds that several boys Bosco named in visions died within months of the dream being recorded. In one case, a boy named Giacomo, age 17, appears in a dream on March 3rd, 1856. Bosco writes that Giacomo is walking toward fire. Giacomo dies June 12, 1856, in a construction accident. Parish records confirm the date. Stella doesn't claim the dreams were prophetic, but he notes the pattern. 2012. Researchers at the University of Turin study Bosco's pedagogical methods. They publish findings in a journal called Education and History. They note that Bosco's emphasis on structure, accountability, and transparency aligns with modern addiction treatment models. Group accountability, routine. Eliminating triggers, frequent check-ins. The language is different, but the framework is similar. Bosco was treating compulsive behavior, and he was using methods that, a century later, science would validate. It could be coincidence. It could be that Bosco, living intimately with hundreds of boys, noticed patterns in behavior that predicted risk. Boys who isolated, boys who seemed depressed, boys who were reckless. Maybe his visions were his subconscious processing data and presenting it in symbolic form. 2 gives a recorded interview to a Salesian historian. Bozzetti is 91 years old. He's asked about Bosco's dreams. He says, Don Bosco knew things he shouldn't know. He told me once that he'd seen me in a dream, standing at a cliff. He said I was about to jump. I hadn't told anyone, but I'd been thinking about suicide. I was 14. I felt trapped in sin. I didn't think I could be forgiven. His words stopped me. Bozzetti's testimony is part of the postulation files for Bosco's sainthood cause, logged under testimony 63. He's begging for donations. And in the middle of all this, he's still obsessed with one issue, sexual purity. Why? Why not focus on poverty? Why not focus on literacy or job training? He does those things, but he keeps coming back to this. In an 1864 letter to a benefactor in Genoa, he writes, "You can teach a boy to read and write, but if his soul is chained to vice, you've accomplished nothing." Bosco sees it as slavery. He uses that word. He writes in an 1870 pamphlet, "A boy enslaved to pleasure is not free. He cannot think. He cannot choose. He serves one master." This is 30 years before Freud, 50 years before the term addiction is applied to behavior, but Bosco is describing exactly that. He's watching boys trapped in cycles they can't escape. And he's convinced the only solution is spiritual intervention combined with environmental control. In an 1876 letter to a Salesian priest in Argentina, where the order is expanding, he writes, "Do not let them be alone. I see it over and over. The boys who fall are the ones who wander off, who have private corners, who slip away during recreation. Watch them." No note. His family is devastated. Bosco is shaken. He writes in his journal, "I failed him. I knew he was struggling. I spoke to him twice. I thought he was improving." Vittorio's death is recorded in the parish registry of San Francesco d'Assisi, June 14th, 1879. Cause of death, suicide by hanging. Bosco spends the rest of the month in his room, praying. He emerges with a new rule. Every boy must meet with a priest one-on-one, weekly, even if not for formal confession, just to talk, to check in. The rule is still in the Salesian School Handbook today. In a speech to a crowd of 5,000 in Barcelona in December 1882, he says, "The world will try to destroy your children through their senses, through their eyes, through their minds. You must guard them as you would guard a treasure." The speech is recorded in the Barcelona diocesan newspaper, El Correo Catalán, December 9th, 1882. Bosco writes his last extended piece on the topic, a 40-page pamphlet titled Counsels to Young Men. It's distributed to every Salesian school. The first 15 pages are about impurity. He describes it as a spiritual cancer. He says, "It starts small, a glance, a thought. Then it spreads. Soon your whole mind is consumed. You cannot pray. You cannot study. You cannot sleep. You're trapped." He recommends sacraments, frequent confession, daily communion if possible, devotion to Mary, physical activity to exhaust the body, cold baths, early rising, hard work. He writes, "An idle boy is a devil's workshop." He says, "I want to tell you what I've seen." He describes a vision from the previous night. He saw a vast plain. On one side, boys in white robes. On the other, boys in rags. He asked why. The guide said, "These are your students. White robes are those who guarded their purity. Rags are those who lost it." He said the boys in rags were not in hell, but in purgatory, suffering for years for sins they committed as teenagers. Bosco tells the Salesians, "Every boy you save from this sin, you save him decades of suffering." The talk is transcribed by Father Giulio Barberis, secretary of the chapter. The transcript is in the Salesian Central Archives, document reference SA 184-16. One letter, dated March 8, 1886, is addressed to a young man named Francesco, who left the Salesian order to get married. In the letter, Bosco congratulates him but warns him, "Guard your marriage bed. The same temptations you faced as a boy will follow you as a man. The devil does not rest. Pray together. Confess often." Francesco later donates the letter to the Salesian Archives. It's labeled Personal Correspondence, Box 12. Bosco sits up, weak as he is. He says, "This is more dangerous than theft. Theft you can repay. This sin, once habitual, can follow you for life. Stop now." G leaves crying. He writes a letter a month later to Father Michel Rua, Bosco's successor, saying, "Don Bosco saw through me. I feel like he saw every sin I'd committed and every sin I would commit if I didn't change." The letter is dated December 20th, 1887, archived under Letters to Father Rua, Volume 7. Father Rua, standing next to him, repeats his words loudly so everyone can hear. Bosco says, "Love God, be good, avoid sin, especially the sin that is hidden. It will ruin you." He blesses them. They leave. He dies the next morning. The death certificate, issued by the city of Turin, records the time as 4:45 on January 31st, 1888. Cause of death, heart failure. Age, 72. His funeral draws 40,000 people. The city shuts down. Newspapers across Europe cover it. The Vatican sends a representative, but in the eulogies, very little is said about the visions. The focus is on his schools, his order, his charity. The dreams are filed away. For decades, they sit in archives, read by scholars, but not widely discussed. Internet arrives. By the 2000s, addiction to pornography is being studied as a clinical phenomenon. Researchers use MRI scans and find that compulsive porn use alters brain chemistry similarly to drug addiction. Dopamine pathways are hijacked. Reward systems are rewired. Users report escalating behavior, needing more extreme content, feeling unable to stop, experiencing shame and isolation. The language is modern, but the experience is what Bosco described in 1850. He writes, "Early exposure to explicit content can set a template that persists into adulthood." He doesn't reference Bosco, but if he did, he'd find Bosco was saying the same thing 150 years earlier, in different words. One man says, "I was 12 when I found my dad's magazines. By 14, I couldn't go a day without it. I'm 35 now, married, kids, and I still fight it every day." Another man says, "It's not about morality for me anymore. It's about bondage. I'm trapped." The language echoes Bosco's letters, replacing the behavior with healthier habits, addressing underlying trauma or shame. These methods work, and they look remarkably like what Bosco built. He created community. He eliminated isolation. He used accountability. He provided confession as a release valve for shame. He filled time with activity and purpose. He gave boys something bigger than themselves to fight for. He didn't have science, but he had observation and intuition, and he believed divine guidance. Schools across continents. And the core of that system was one message. You're not alone. You're not beyond help. Fight, confess, get up, fight again. The dreams are still in the archives, digitized, searchable. Anyone can read them. They're uncomfortable. They're graphic. They don't fit modern sensibilities. But they're also a window into one man's obsession with saving kids from a trap he believed was lethal. Whether you believe his visions were real or symbolic, the boys he wrote about were real. The deaths he recorded were real. The confessions he heard were real. And the fear he felt, fear that drove him to build an empire of education, that was real too. The Order's records list over 20,000 boys who passed through his schools during his lifetime. How many were saved in the sense Bosco meant? We don't know. But the letters in the archives, the testimonies from former students, the deathbed confessions, they all point to one thing. Bosco got through. To some, not all. But enough that decades later, grown men still wrote letters thanking him for pulling them back from an edge they didn't know they were standing on. The guide could be an angel, could be his subconscious, could be nothing. But the rivers are a perfect metaphor for what he spent his life teaching. Two paths, same destination. One leaves you whole, one leaves you damaged. The choice, he believed, is made young, in private moments, in small decisions that accumulate. And once the pattern is set, it's brutally hard to break. A saint or a prude. The church says saint. The canonization process examined his life under a microscope. Witnesses testified. Miracles were investigated. 2 were confirmed. A healing in 1928, another in 1932, both medically documented, both attributed to his intercession. The Vatican ruled. He's in the canon. Feast day, January 31st. Some say they were genuine mystical experiences. Others say they were Bosco's psychological method for processing the trauma of watching boys destroy themselves. A Jungian reading would call them archetypal journeys through the collective unconscious. A Freudian reading would call them repressed anxiety manifesting as nightmares. A Catholic reading calls them gifts from God. Pick your lens. Bosco changed Catholic education. Before him, schools were harsh. Corporal punishment was standard. Bosco introduced what he called the preventive system. Love, not fear. Reason, not force. But always with structure, always with vigilance. His motto was watch and pray. Watch the boys, pray for them, never leave them alone. Never assume they're fine. The system is still taught in Salesian formation programs today. And the core issue he obsessed over? Still relevant. The mechanism has changed. In 1850, it was brothels and lithographs. In 2025, it's smartphones and infinite content. But the psychology is identical. Easy access, privacy, escalation, shame, isolation, addiction. The numbers are staggering. A 2021 study by the British Board of Film Classification found that 53% of boys aged 11 to 13 in the UK have seen pornography. Average age of first exposure, 13. And it's not static images, it's video, high definition, algorithmically curated to maximize engagement, dopamine slot machines. Remove the stimulus, fill the time, provide accountability, offer grace, repeat. That's per a 2019 longitudinal study by the University of Sao Paulo covering 5,000 students over 20 years. Correlation, not causation. But it's something. The top answer is not academics, it's the priests. Specifically the priests who listened, who made time, who noticed when something was wrong. One man, now 58, says, "I was 15. I was a mess. I thought I was broken. Father Giovanni sat with me. He said, 'You're not broken. You're human. Let's work on this.' That changed my life." The interviews are archived at the Don Bosco University in Rome. It's what he did, over and over, for 47 years. Sit with the kid, listen, don't judge, offer hope, provide a path forward, and then watch them, not to control, to protect. Because the world, in his view, was full of traps, and boys, especially teenage boys, were walking into them blind. They terrified him, and that terror became action. Schools, rules, confessions, letters, sermons, a lifetime of relentless focus on one issue, because he believed, with every fiber, that losing the fight here meant losing everything. Then it pivots to modern language, healthy sexuality, media literacy, consent, education. The visions aren't mentioned. They're too intense, too medieval. They don't translate well. But the core concern is the same. Boys trapped, unable to stop, needing help. He built them because he was convinced boys were dying, spiritually and sometimes physically, from preventable causes. And the primary cause, in his assessment, was sexual sin leading to despair. So he fought, with every tool he had: structure, sacraments, community. And when those weren't enough, he used fear. He told boys what he saw: hell, fire, chains, eternity. Guilt and shame can be destructive. There's truth to that. But there's also truth in what Bosco saw. Boys hurting themselves, repeating behaviors they hated, feeling powerless. And sometimes fear breaks paralysis. Sometimes the image of where you're headed is enough to make you turn around. And researchers keep studying them, keep cross-referencing, keep asking, oh, how did he know? Some will never have an answer. Others already have theirs. But the journals remain, evidence of one man's absolute conviction that the battle for a boy's soul is won or lost in private, in moments no one else sees, over decisions that seem small until they compound. In 2022, the Salesian Archives in Rome released a document they'd held back. It's a letter Bosco wrote in 1886 to Father Michel Rua, marked not for publication. In it, Bosco describes a vision he had where he saw the 20th century. He describes machines that show images. He describes boys alone in rooms, staring at these machines, unable to stop. He writes, "The enemy will use light itself to trap them." The letter is 3 pages, handwritten, dated November 4th, 1886. It's now cataloged as Document SA 297-41. Scholars debated its authenticity. Handwriting analysis confirmed it's Bosco's. The paper matches other documents from the same period. The ink is consistent. And whether Bosco saw the future or just understood human nature well enough to predict how technology would be weaponized, the result is the same. He warned about a trap 140 years ago, and the trap is here.